Christmas and Happy Hanukkah, fellow members. I'm sure that all of you had an opportunity to see those emails that were floating around the last couple of weeks, setting great expectations for this program today, talking about the mystery guest and stay tuned for a great surprise. Well, I don't know if you know this or not, but that one was not able to be here today. I'm pretty sure that was Santa Claus, but Stephanie's not telling me exactly what happened there. She just called me on Thursday and told me, you got to get a speaker for Monday for the program. And I said, why do I have to do that? And she said, well, you're my board liaison. And I said, okay. I happened to be going to a cocktail party that night, and I saw Tom Noonan across the room. And I went up to Tom and I said, Tom, guess who's speaking at Rotary on Monday? And he said, I don't know. And I said, you are. And he started laughing. And I said, no, really, you really are. And so the next morning we were in a meeting, and I walked up to him and said, you ready to go? And he says, go where? And I said, Monday, Rotary, you're speaking. He says, you weren't kidding about that? So I want you all to please appreciate the fact that Tom put together this great program in very short order. And the one requirement he said is make my intro brief. I'm not ready to keep seated right now. So you had an opportunity to see a great bio of him in this morning's email. I encourage you to read it. It's very impressive. Let me just give you some highlights. He grew up in Atlanta. He went to Georgia Tech, graduated, knocked around for a few years at various companies, and then had an opportunity very early in life to team up with Chris Klaus and start Internet Security Systems, ISS, which I think we all know got sold to IBM in about mid-2000s, 2007 or so, for $1 gazillion. And after that, Tom became a serial entrepreneur, starting over 20 companies that he sold a few of those, still runs a bunch of those, and has about 84 different companies in his portfolio of businesses. He's very philanthropic, takes great care of Atlanta through his endeavors, through his resources, and through his time. He spent time on the Woodruff Arts Board, the Westminster Board, the CHOA Board, Georgia Tech Foundation, and athletic boards. He has been appointed to various national security panels in Washington since 2001, worked for a number of our United States presidents, including the Obama and Trump and Bush administrations. He is the guy to see. He is also a great golfing buddy of mine. We spend a lot of time down at the beach playing golf, which is always fun. And we have been in the same YPO forum for over 20 years. And last night was our Christmas dinner party. And Tom, as usual, brought some great wine, which we all enjoyed, maybe more than we should have. And so I hope that Tom's presentation is better than my introduction. With that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tom Noonan.
I told Tommy when I got here this morning I was playing hurt. He and Beth did serve some amazing wine. And those of you that know me know if there's amazing wine in a room, I'm game. So thank you, Tommy and Stephanie. It's great to be back in Atlanta. It's great to be back with my fellow Atlanta Rotarians. Kim and I moved to Florida last November, and what we've realized is we've spent our whole lives in Atlanta. Kim was my freshman chemistry lab partner at Georgia Tech, so we've been together for a long time. But what we realized is you can leave Atlanta, but Atlanta never leaves you. It kind of goes along with you on the journey. So I'm delighted to be back. We have prepared a brief presentation for today. Thank you very much. And I think we would all agree today that the digital world is more important with every passing day to us in America. It's opened countless new doors of opportunity. Looking across this room, I see many very, very successful internet entrepreneurs. And every business, quite frankly, is a digital business. You know, when your software company is losing employees to Chick-fil-A because they're digitizing their business, you start to realize everyone is a digital business. And it's created extraordinary new sources of prosperity and unleashed a new era of entrepreneurship and innovation that has infused nearly every aspect of our lives and our society. But as with many great innovations, there are unintended consequences. Cyber risk has become one of the most pressing challenges for business and individuals alike. Today, I'll provide a brief update on the cybersecurity landscape, and I'll be joined later for a fireside chat in about 8 minutes by Dan Ingevaldsen, and I'll introduce Dan when it's time. So while this revolution has spurred countless new opportunities, it has also spawned new threats. The criminal terrorists and foreign adversaries that constantly prowl this digital domain represent a threat to this nation and, more importantly, to civil society. Our adversaries and strategic competitors are increasingly using cyber capabilities, including cyber espionage, cyber attack, influence operations, and other methods to gain political, economic, and military advantage over the United States and our allies. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea increasingly use cyber operations to poison both minds and machines in an ever-expanding number of ways. They steal information, they influence our citizens, and they disrupt our critical infrastructure. At present, China and Russia present the greatest cyber threats, but we anticipate that all of our adversaries and our strategic competitors will increasingly build and incorporate cyber espionage, attack, and influence capabilities into their efforts to influence U.S. policies or advance their own national security interests. In the last decade, our adversaries have developed a growing capability to shape and alter the information and systems on which we rely on. For years, they've conducted espionage with the intention of gaining access to our information. They are now becoming more adept at using social media to alter what we believe, how we think, behave, and decide. As we connect and integrate billions of new digital devices into our lives and business processes, adversaries and strategic competitors almost certainly will gain greater insight into our access to our protected information. So let's jump right into this. Why is this happening? Look, everybody knows our information technology infrastructure is complex, complicated, fragile, and susceptible to a wide range of threats. Like street crime, which historically grew in relation to population growth, we are witnessing a similar evolution of cybercrime on the internet. It's not just about more sophisticated weaponry. It's much more about the growing number and value of human and digital targets. The scale of the internet has grown unlike anything we have seen in the history of mankind. In less than 25 years, we now have over 50 billion connected devices. The sheer scale of the internet is almost too difficult to grasp. Over 330 million devices are being added every month. Some 5 billion people are connected today, which is over 60% of the world. And I was thinking as I prepared these thoughts, when we started ISS in 1994, there were less than 10 million people connected to the internet, 10 million hosts. So it's come a long way. At its most fundamental level, managing risk is a function of the complex relationship between vulnerabilities, those are the weaknesses, threats, active exploitation of those vulnerabilities, and the consequences associated with the value of that asset. Countermeasures and compensating controls have to be applied to manage and reduce the inherent risk so that residual risk is lowered. But remember, I said this is a very complex and complicated organism. Ironically, for all of its complexity, the number one vulnerability on the internet remains the undisciplined human. In the US, 74% of organizations suffered a successful phishing attack last year. That's mind-boggling. And it cost an average of $4 million to the targeted organization. And I think, as we all know, almost 100% of the phishing attacks have come over email, but they're increasingly coming over text if you've monitored your text threads lately. But despite efforts over the years to manage cyber risk, the statistics remind us we have a long way to go. Despite the billions of dollars of mitigating controls, regulatory oversight, law enforcement actions, criminal cyber activity still costs about $3 trillion a year. I think the GDP of the world is about 100 trillion total. So, that's a massive, massive number. So one of the most frequent questions I get is, who the hell is behind this? Threat actors come in all shapes and sizes, but you can broadly bucket them into three types of categories. One is political or ideological, two is nation state, three is criminal or for-profit. And their motives vary by threat actor and include social disruption and disinformation, influence operations that are targeted to diminish faith in our institutions, like our government, theft of intellectual property, economic espionage, infrastructure disruption, terrorism, and defense, national security, infrastructure infiltration. By far the most dangerous and sophisticated of these threats are the nation-state sponsored actors. These actors are highly sophisticated. They operate continuously, and they're financed and directed by state actors that target high-value political and economic targets. The nature of these attack operations are prolonged over very long periods of time, usually many, many years. Some of these operations have been in effect for 20 years that are nation-state sponsored, and they always have a high level of sophistication. So each of the nation-state actors has multiple threat actor groups within them, and they are monitored by both our government, Information Assurance, Department of Homeland Security, et cetera, but also our private sector and private sector security companies around the world. They are tracked by APT designations. APT means Advanced Persistent Threat, and I'll give you some examples of that. Probably the most notorious hacking group in the world is the Russian Federal Security Service, or the FSB. The Russian counterintelligence service is basically the forerunner of the old KGB, and I think it was started in about 1994. But Russia also has a number of other threat actors organized under the GRU, which is Russia's largest foreign intelligence agency that specializes in government and political organization operations. The GRU were the people that hacked Hillary Clinton's server in her bathroom. Another is China Double Dragon, which is APT-41. We've been monitoring them for almost 20 years. They're a threat group that researchers have assessed clearly as Chinese state-sponsored espionage, and they conduct almost entirely financially motivated operations. So APT-41 has been observed targeting healthcare, telecom, technology, and video game industries in 14 countries. Not to be left out is Iran, APT-39 and 33, one of the several Iranian cyber espionage groups that are conducted by the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence and Security. They increasingly target the physical control systems used in electrical utilities, manufacturing, and oil refineries. So they're after the IoT portion of the infrastructure. And again, not to be left out is North Korea, APT-38, also known as the Lazarus Group. Dan, they've been around a while, right? Not very sophisticated, but very, very focused on financial cyber operations. So nobody's trading currency through their central banks with North Korea. So they're some of the best at crypto jacking, crypto hacking. They're they're all over the DeFi applications because that's the way they fund their war effort. So while cyber threats to U.S. interests are real, I still believe the digital sky is not falling. No threat facing America has grown as fast or in a manner as difficult to understand as the danger from cyber attacks. The U.S. is leveraging the forces of the market to make the investments needed to secure the country's diverse cybersecurity infrastructure. And, clearly our prosperity and security depend on how well we do that. So what I'd like to do now is introduce my friend. I just wanted to give you a bit of a preamble before Dan and I get up at this fireside chat. And, we want to develop some themes of discussion around lots of cyber issues, and we encourage you also to ask us questions. But with that, I will introduce Dan Ingevalds. And Dan was the head of our ISS X-Force threat research organization. Dan was a co-founder with me of Endgame Security, which became one of the largest suppliers to the Department of Defense and the intelligence community for the products that we were building. Dan was the CTO for Easy Solutions. He sits on a ton of security boards. He's a great friend and a very well-recognized cyber expert. Come on up, Dan. This one I thought would be a great icebreaker. What are the biggest cyber threats today? And kind of help this crowd, which are not cyber experts, understand how this is happening.
Sure. So I was thinking about this when you were talking, Tom, because you brought some history into it from the old days. Like I joined ISS in '98, right? So things were still scaling up. But the funny thing that when I was sitting down listening to your remarks, we were building cybersecurity technology for companies in a period where on the internet there really wasn't anything to steal. This was pre-e-commerce. This was when companies were just coming online. We were just realizing what would happen. All those funny quotes about Good Morning America, people talking about what is this internet thing we're all circulating, and it was remarkable to be there on the early stages. Now there's literally everything to steal, and I think the major theme underneath maybe the main attack vectors that we talk about, ransomware, phishing, all the stuff that is more technical in nature, is just the great leveling that we've seen, right? So every company. In the old days, we would hear our pitch, and if you were a big company, you were concerned about it. If you were small, the question was, why would anybody bother with my company? Who am I? Why would anybody attack me? Now, through ransomware, cryptocurrency, a lot of these state-sponsored actors, Iran is running state-sponsored attacks to hack into tens of thousands of small businesses, lock up their computers, and basically acquire ransom through them. So small business, mid-sized business, Global 2000, Fortune 10 are all dealing with the exact same problems. That's super scary because the resources that are available to commit to defense are so dramatically different. Small businesses are trying to hire cybersecurity experts. These guys can walk out the door and get a job at Netflix or Amazon or Google and make $500,000 a year. So that's kind of the undercurrent that has been really jarring and has been shaping the industry. I think going back to the old days, phishing is still an issue. Phishing is a con game. It is convincing someone to do something that they think they shouldn't, but they do anyway, right? Like in the early phishing schemes we would see, there was a link, there was an attachment. Don't click a bad link. Don't click a funny attachment. Now it's all just, hey, I'm so-and-so. I'm the CFO's assistant. We got to wire this money. The CFO's in Fiji. It's got to happen right now. And it's a confidence game. And this brings in all sorts of things about AI and just all of the technology on either side of producing credible scams and then technology to try to prevent people from doing things that they know they shouldn't do.
I knew I shouldn't have sent that money to that Nigerian uncle of mine. You remember those? Those were the early days. But Dan, I think you're bringing up a really interesting thing, and it's something that we've seen really since the advent of cryptocurrencies, is we now have nation-state actors, like Dan said, Iran and North Korea, attacking small businesses with ransomware. And if you get 1,000 a day at $50,000 to unlock, and you get it in a DeFi way, in a crypto, or some digital asset, it really adds up. And some of these rogue governments are actually financing themselves through these activities.
Yeah, I mean, if you would have said 20 years ago that we live in a world where the North Koreans are financing their nuclear weapons program through phishing attacks, I would have said you're crazy. But that's exactly what's happening. It's every person, every executive, every company is held at risk through globally dispersed, decentralized adversaries, right? It's such a different warfighting environment where we're not talking about like the range of a missile or a smart bomb or a bullet from a gun. Every single one of us is held at risk from adversaries all over the world that are highly financed, motivated, and now they're actually financially incented. That's the whole thing about crypto that's been so corrosive, where all this stuff was possible. It's just they couldn't get the money, right? And now they can get the money. They can wash it. They can launder it, and they can put it right in their pockets to do things in the real world. And that's been the dramatic change in the last 5 or 6 years.
Dan, let's talk about what we've just recently seen in the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Sure.
With Russia's hacking. I mean, we've moved to the theater of war now.
Sure. So there's kind of two sides of the story. The first was that everyone expected this to be like the first real cyber war. You have a really skilled cyber adversary in Russia, proven to be very skilled. You have a relatively online adversary, and everyone kind of expected, at least in kind of the cyber pundit class, that there'd be all these cyber attacks happening. It really didn't happen that way. However, there was one.
More cyber and less kinetic.
Yeah, it's really an old-fashioned World War II artillery war. But on the first hour of the conflict, Russia launched an attack on the Viasat system, which is a satellite-based communication system. And it was really, really clever. What they did was they basically staged the attack months before. They compromised a global publicly traded satellite communications company. They inserted an update for the little modem that sits on the ground that talks to the satellite. And on the first hour, when the tanks were rolling, they hit go, and they crashed all those modems. So all of the tactical battlefield communication systems that the in-field commanders were relying upon didn't work. This is why you might have seen Elon Musk in the news giving his satellite system to the Ukrainian warfighters, because it was a successfully implemented cyber attack. Probably the first one at this scale. It was sort of well executed. The problem was it took out a bunch of turbines in Germany and a few other places around Europe. But it had the desired effect, and it kind of gives a glimpse of where things are going. I still think that cyber will be a smaller component in conflicts in the future, but it was an interesting case study.
Guys, I just checked my phone, and it is 1:01.
Oh, boy.
So anybody that wants to leave, please leave. We're happy to stay and chat and take questions. I just did not realize we were pressing. Oh, 1:15.
Yeah, I'll come up when it's time.
Oh, okay.
Great.
I don't know, for some reason I had 1 o'clock in my, I think that's when I used to walk out. Oops. Sorry, Steph. Exactly. Tommy told me, don't you dare go more than 1 minute over 1 o'clock. So my wife's grandfather used to sit in the first pew of the Baptist church in South Georgia. And when the preacher went over, he took his keys out and he'd start rattling them. So since nobody has pulled their keys out, we will keep going. So Dan, let's expand on this. The fact that Russia obviously preempted Ukraine's ability to have any reaction to when they started rolling tanks, because they had absolutely no communications.
Sure.
And, as we think about the future of geopolitical conflict, do we see that go out of control?
I think so. I mean, there's a trajectory here. I remember Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander in Desert Shield and Desert Storm, had an interesting quote back in the early 90s. And this was really early in networked kind of command and control warfare. Systems are talking to other systems, and he said he didn't really care if if the Iraqis knew what he was saying or what he was doing. He just wanted to make sure he knew first. He had like that 1 hour advantage because stuff changes so fast, information changes so fast in the battlefield. So I think we're going to see more of this. It'll be focused on command and control, communication, disruption, disinformation, which takes the conversation a bunch of different areas, but just introducing and maintaining the fog of war in the early days. You know, the whole attack in Ukraine, it was based upon a decapitation strategy. Go to Kiev, take out Zelensky, and then see what happens.
Right.
Didn't quite work out that way, mainly because the Iraqis or the Ukrainians were super adaptable. They kind of bobbed when the Russians thought they're going to weave, and you know we're still watching it play out today.
Yep.
But I think we will see much more targeted attacks towards communications infrastructure and systems which are less resilient, more brittle, and more subject to attacks on network communications.
Yep. And warfighters absolutely, positively depend on satellite communication. I mean, there's 100 of them going up a month these days, and you know the ability to own space is a really important part of our own Department of Defense strategy today for that reason.
And it's remarkable. I mean, you guys have probably seen some of the little videos on Twitter or the news, of Russian vehicles being hit by missiles and drone attacks. A lot of that video is being carried over Starlink satellite links that were brought over by Tesla and Elon Musk, right? So these systems are basically ushering in this era of hyper modern, the new blitzkrieg, hyper modern high speed warfare.
Dan, let's change subjects.
Sure.
Everybody in this room is dealing with a couple of different things. Number one, this concept of back to office, remote worker,
Sure.
et cetera, which basically took all of our assets away from the corporate network and put them in Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, your living room. What are you seeing companies do to fortify their end user computing when nobody's even coming to the office?
Sure. Yeah. So that's a big one. We found that this the movement from corporate controlled assets to personal assets has been remarkable. I mean, how many of us do business? Look at board decks. Have obviously critical communication on our personal devices, personal iPads, personal iPhones. And when we go home, and when we're home all the time, we're on the same network as our kids' gaming computers and God knows what else they're doing. And we found that while executives and board members have plenty of protection, they have rings of protection that are provided by their security staff when they're in the office. When they go home, it's a complete free-for-all. You have a home Wi-Fi network that hasn't been updated in probably 10 years. It's maintained by some other company. The password has been shared by every kid in the neighborhood for the last 10 years as well. And you're dealing with confidential information, oftentimes regulatorily controlled information. So we find that some companies now are working on devising executive protection for cyber, for personal assets. And it's interesting because the chief information security officer, often the most senior ranking security person in any large company, they have this weird kind of limbo situation that they find themselves in where they are responsible for like the full bubble of security around an executive, but they have no ability to protect them when they're at home. And that's a huge vulnerability, so we're seeing a lot of technology and companies that are focused on that, just providing a broader set of protection for personal use.
Thanks. Good point. How many of you have had a pop-up that says there's a new version of the software, download it? Just all of us. We're all cloud computing now, right?
Yep.
And one of the
mic time.
one of the difficult challenges with supply chain as a threat vector we experienced last year with SolarWinds, and this is something that's opening up a whole new horizon in terms of the threat vector. Do you want to hit that?
Sure, I can speak briefly about it. So I went back to look at the difference between when I first started in this industry and now. So there was about 1,000 security vulnerabilities a year, which came out in the 99-2000 timeframe. Now it's around 30,000 a year. And we're dealing with 30,000 vulnerabilities across tens of millions of software packages, mostly open source. So the best way to compromise a large system these days is to get a developer to use a bad piece of code, which is then pulled into their systems and drug along. Someone did an experiment, and they said, I want to see if I can hack Apple, Google, and Facebook at the same time. And what they did was they found this little piece of open source software that was maintained by some guy in Eastern Europe that was used by all these other pieces of software, which were used by all these others. We call that a dependency chain. And he introduced a vulnerability, and that code was pulled into these systems and deployed across 3 of the biggest scaled tech companies in the world. Attack the developer, attack the source code, and it basically gets pulled into systems.
Nobody had to hack anything.
Yeah,
Once it
yeah.
was inserted, it was done, and it propagates. It's scary. Stephanie is up here peering with
So I think one of the questions probably everybody in the audience has is because we all do go home, right, and
Sure.
do things. So the problem with joining some of the things that supposedly are going to protect you is they themselves can get hacked and are vulnerable. So what do we do as somebody, as a private citizen, to help protect ourselves?
Sure, I can start. So I did mention Apple and Google and these guys in somewhat of a negative way, but really the only companies that have the scale to withstand the attacks from the guys that are pictured on the slide are the big hyperscalers. It's why you're seeing the security community really embrace cloud computing. These guys have the resources, they have the ability to actively hunt adversaries, remove them from networks. So run your business like you run your house. Keep everything simple, put everything in the cloud, use 2-factor authentication for everything, and try to simplify and maintain some degree of hygiene, right? So
and trust nothing.
Yeah, trust nothing.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So do we have some questions? Keith in the back, I know, is already up.
Thank you, Stephanie. Tom, it's good to see you again.
You too, Keith.
A couple of weeks ago, Senator Nunn spoke to us about the nuclear threats that are facing all of us, and he highlighted a video that was conducted by our mutual friend Richard Clark, who's a colleague of mine at Paladin Capital. And last Friday, I was with him in D.C., where he talked about the evolution of the cyber insurance market. And I know we have a lot of business people in this club who have to buy cyber insurance, and as most people will tell you, the premiums are going up. And I was curious to know whether you had any ideas of possible technologies or solutions that companies could do to mitigate the rising cost of their cyber insurance.
It's a great question, Keith, and cyber insurance is going up for a reason, because the risk is going up, and that's typically the way insurers look at their business. But this is a really interesting question, because in 1999 we ISS formed a partnership with Marsh McLennan and said, you're insuring these companies. There was no such thing as cyber insurance at the time, but you're insuring these companies, and operationally, these networks are at risk. And if you both identified vulnerabilities and put mitigating controls on that network, you could lower the risk. Dick Clark was at the White House back then. He was a good friend. But you fast forward to today, and I really think every company has to have, I don't care how big or how small you are, you have to have your version of an enterprise risk management program. Mm-hmm. And you've got to identify threat objectives. You've got to identify where your inherent risk is, and then add either compensating controls or other processes or technology to reduce that inherent risk to some residual risk that is palatable. And 20 years ago, that would have been a very strange concept for a small business. But I think crypto, the whole malware crypto debacle really changed that, because small businesses lost their data. Yeah. And they're like, why are they targeting me? Well, these were botnets running around, spreading this. So I agree with Dan. I think the big cloud providers are doing a much better job, and even a great job with their security stack today and what they're capable of. And I would put as much as I could in there, and I would I would build my own enterprise risk management program, probably model it after the NIST framework. But I think if you're going to operate a business that's heavily dependent, you have to.
David?
I was going to ask about disinformation and AI and its impact on disinformation, but listening to you and knowing some of the stuff that you're privy to, I really just wanted to ask, what scares you the most?
Well, it's funny. You might have hit the most scary thing. I don't know if you guys have seen the press about this new technology called GPT or Chat GPT in the last week. So this is an AI model that's run by a company called OpenAI, founded by a couple Silicon Valley guys. One of them was Elon Musk, but he resigned from the board a couple years ago because he was too afraid.
He got scared.
He got scared of the capabilities. Well, GPT is an esoteric machine learning thing that a lot of Georgia Tech PhDs would get really excited about. But last week, they wrapped it around a chat interface called ChatGPT. And you get a free account, you log in, ask it any question you want. And this thing has been trained with something like 1 trillion data elements, every web page on the internet, all open source code available, billions and billions of records. And you can ask it to do your homework. You can ask it to do your homework in a style of the New York Times. You can ask it to write an essay in the style of Shakespeare. You can have it write a perfectly crafted phishing email. What's one of the things we told you about phishing emails 10 years ago? Look for typos and weird cadence and syntax issues. That was gone as of Wednesday of last week, right? So this stuff is accelerating at warp speed the ability to produce extremely high quality content on any subject that's original and unique is going to fuel a firestorm of disinformation. And you think about like the historical references towards information. You had Goebbels for the Nazis. You had Stalin and his team during the early years of the Soviet Union. They had control of the media. They had control of the papers, but they didn't have velocity. Now there's velocity. Now you can produce unlimited amounts of information for free.
Yeah, velocity and scale.
Swarm every system. This is why the conversation on Twitter is so germane and interesting for a whole bunch of other reasons. So I'm really worried about the ability for our technology to counteract these negative influences of AI and malicious content creation that is really it's just starting. And like when you use GPT, I encourage everyone to sign up. You sign up, put in your email address, you have an account. It's like chatting with your kids on SMS or text message. It's that easy. And I sensed a before and after kind of fulcrum in time. There's everything before this technology and everything after. And it's going to, I'm in the venture capital business, and I'm already starting to see pitches of companies that are saying, I'm going to use GPT to solve this problem and that problem and this problem. And it's only about a week in the public consciousness. So that's what I'm worried about, and that's what we're concerned about on the investment side.
Be interesting to see how freedom of speech applies to artificially
Exactly.
intelligent.
This is going to make our brain hurt.
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
My brain already hurts. Billy?
You mentioned we've been able to identify the nation states that are our adversaries and APT 3940. And the best thing that we can do is build a bulletproof hull and try to defend against attacks against the modern economies or the U.S. economy. Turning that on its head, do we have or can you share your view on the United States' ability to do the same to those nation states, the reverse espionage? Or is there an ally or a country who is our partner in this, in beating these adversaries at their own game?
Sure.
We're the best in the world at it.
Yeah.
I mean, don't think that we're innocent, because we ain't.
Yeah.
The fact is, our signals intelligence across various categories is very advanced. We have partners all over the world. In our intelligence community, we've got the Five Eyes that we share information with very openly. But at the same time, this is kind of like a cat and mouse game. So they're monitoring us and we're monitoring them. We know they're on our networks. They know we're on their networks. And, it's hard to say, but we're among the best in the world, if not the best in the world at this.
Yeah, and I'd add to that there's a couple terms of art that have been thrown around for the last 20 years, like hacking back, active defense. Now it's called take the fight forward. It means the same thing, just a different brand, right? So you saw this during 2020, you saw it during 2016. There were Russian operations which are filling Twitter with bots, which were involved in the political discourse, paying for ads in rubles, all the stuff that we've seen. They were effectively knocked offline. This is public. Knocked offline during the 2020 election or the midterms, I forgot which one, by U.S. Cyber Command, which is a dual-hatted organization that's run by the director of the NSA. So we are now actively participating in forward operations in cyber. And it's really to unwind the comment I made earlier around all of us being held at risk by adversaries. This is all the laws of warfighting and cyber are being written as we speak. Does deterrence work? What is the escalatory ladder in cyber? If the Russians knock over a power plant, do we launch a missile at an air base? All this stuff was well defined.
Can we even attribute it?
Yeah, I mean,
right?
Rand has been working on this for 50 years in the normal physical domain, but all this stuff is very, very new. So I expect much more of that. And there was something interesting happening where we were always doing this. This is all public, but now we're holding press conferences and saying what we're doing, and saying if you throw a rock, we're going to throw a bigger one, and we'll see where that takes us. But I think it needs to happen. We need to shorten the distance between us and our adversaries.
Joe?
I'll repeat it, Joe.
There we go.
All right.
One of the attributes of the internet was we got rid of the warehouse business model and started just in time in every component that goes to build something else. What is our vulnerability because of the cascading impacts of this at targeted efforts to basically disrupt the economy through the supply chain, other than just importing junk into your code?
So just, you mean on supply chain, the physical supply chain in general?
Yeah, talk about automobiles, talk about food, talk
Sure.
about the whole transport issue.
I mean, look, everything is instrumented today. Mm-hmm. Every truck you see on the highway, whatever goods that person is moving, they know where he is, how many hours that truck has slept, when he stopped for gas. It is totally instrumented, and having access to that communication system, you could easily disrupt, a massive supply chain problem just by getting into that flow of goods. And so, this is why at every level we've got to have protection. That's why companies, Alan DeBerry's sitting here. He started AirWatch when mobile devices started becoming corporate devices. We had all our infrastructure at ISS. Investing in cybersecurity is awesome because everything changes all the time. The adversaries change, the methods change, the infrastructure changes, and as Dan was saying, now we got stuff like GPT-3. Our artificial intelligence is going to throw a massive wrench into these spokes. Sam, you got a question?
Yeah, speak to the difference between the regulatory environment and the regulators, the people, Congress, and its lack of understanding of what you all are talking about, and the public's lack of understanding leads to this huge gap in credibility. And now we're seeing AI come up with not only voice recognition, but visual, that they can put the president on your device.
Yep.
And there's no truth source to go to validate this is who that says it is. The industry has, I'm sure, got to believe, where are we going if the regulators are doing things to us and they don't even understand us?
Yeah, I will tell you, Sam, I think it's come a long way. I remember my first hearing where I testified before the House Ag Committee in like 1997. You thought I was speaking a foreign language to the, not only our elected officials, but to the staffers. I actually think we've made a lot of progress in this country over 20 years. You've got a new generation of, what are we on after millennial, whatever that is, Gen X, Gen Z, Gen Y.
Gen Alpha.
Gen Alpha, whatever it is. But they all grew up with digital devices. They tend to be more tech savvy. So I actually see that moving in a better way for our country. And having said that, you've got people like Gary Gensler, who's the chair of the SEC. I mean, Gensler has taught crypto at MIT for a long time. I mean, there's nothing you're going to tell Gensler about DeFi or cryptocurrency. And so I think we're actually moving in the right direction in this country, which is very, very pleasing to me because I found it so frustrating. I testified before Congress multiple times, and I just didn't feel like they got it. And as passionate as we were about the subject, and more importantly, the experiences we were dealing with on a day-to-day basis with the telecom infrastructure, the banking infrastructure, et cetera. But the country has moved, pretty aggressively, and I always think we're going to have a challenge with regulators and operators because we don't like regulation. I mean, who in this room that's operating a business wants more regulation? I see no hands. But, it's a necessary evil in a functioning capitalist society, but I think we're making great progress there.
So as a last thing for the members of the audience, and this is being taped, so other folks who couldn't be here today can see this, is there a resource that you would recommend for those that want to be able to go back and dig into this more, to learn about how to protect your business, what good hygiene, you mentioned that earlier, where can we go to dig in a little more and find useful information?
So there are a number of places. The first place I'll tell you, if you want to dig into this foreign adversary stuff just because you're curious about it, go to MITRE, M-I-T-R-E. MITRE tracks all these APTs, and I haven't been out there in a while, but I mean, they have all the updates, all the methods that they're, and it's just fascinating. It's like reading a spy novel because it's so pervasive in terms of that. The other resources I would suggest is, from a business perspective, Department of Homeland Security has a bunch of well-prepared documents for business owners about what they should be doing. And I would also find a trusted security partner, probably a managed services type company, to just like you got an alarm company that's monitoring your alarm at home, I think every business ought to have a relationship with someone who can pull them out of the mud if they get there, or keep them out of the mud otherwise. And there are a lot of those great companies. Dan, is there another?
No, I think the DHS one was good. I mean, there's an organization called CISA, which is a sub-agency under DHS that runs cyber for the U.S. government. And it's run by real professionals. Chris Krebs was the original director. Jen Easterly is there now. We have friends like Dmitry Alperovich, who runs co-founder of CrowdStrike, $50 billion cyber company. He left the company after it IPO'd, and now he works on policy in D.C. So we have really smart people pushing this in all the right directions. And I think, it's funny, a lot of these security talks are kind of gloom and doom, but if you zoom out, the phones still work. Our cars are still going to navigate on the path that we intend for them to go on. Our money's still in the bank. Our system is 100% wired, 100% reliant on the internet, and it functions really well. We're talking about the corner cases. Security people, we live in the failure mode, right? Everything we talk about is when stuff doesn't work, but remarkably, because we've built these systems over the last 20 years, are functioning incredibly well. It's bringing in massive prosperity around the world. So these systems are working, and we're just constantly tuning around the edges to make them more powerful, more effective, and more useful for commerce and for the world at large.
Well, please join me in thanking Tom and Dan.
Thank you.